Honestly, our running backs are even more banged up than our receivers are. We've actually got a lot of the top ones here this week. It's just an injury machine. So being that I've already stirred a lot of things up today on the wide receiver rankings, we'll see if we'll stir some more things up with the running back rankings. But I'm doing everything I can to get us ready for week 10. So make sure to go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. Now, get into our first tier. I'm going to leave it very exclusive for Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey this week. They're both in good health as far as we know. And listen, Jonathan Taylor getting bottled up for 2 weeks straight just doesn't feel realistic to me. It is an overseas game. I usually do not like these, but when you're having a historic season like Jonathan Taylor is having, oftentimes, I don't care who the matchup is, and it's against Atlanta, hot and cold defense, but I'm just not going with it 2 weeks straight, him getting shut down. That idea repulses me, and I just do not think it will happen again. Christian McCaffrey, number 2 versus the Rams. Look, you can range these two either way you want. I mean, McCaffrey, in theory, could have a very good day and have a better day than Jonathan Taylor does, because if you look at the first game, the Rams and the San Francisco 49ers, they were putting up points all over each other in that game. I do think that either way you go, you can't go wrong in this first tier. McCaffrey's floor has been higher than Jonathan Taylor's because of pass catching, but I will say this week, he's playing a much tougher front seven than the one that Jonathan Taylor's playing. That's why I've got him at 2. Dropping down to our next tier, it feels really weird and wrong, honestly, to put Bijan at 3 at the beginning of tier 2, and then James Cook is at 4. So with Bijan, there's a couple reasons he didn't make it inside of tier 1 for me personally. Number 1 is because Bijan, this game is overseas. I do not like overseas games. I get it. I said Jonathan Taylor was going to be great. But the other reason that Jonathan Taylor doesn't have to deal with is how bad this offense is against any opponent. Like, the difference between Jonathan Taylor's offense last week was the Steelers and Mike Tomlin, they made Daniel Jones look dumb, unlike any other team has really done this year. Now, with the Falcons, they can lose to anybody, and they can look horrible against anybody. It doesn't matter. They don't discriminate against good or bad opponents. They'll lose to anybody. So I do think that with Bijan, you've got to worry about that to an extent. But obviously, the guy's floor has been so good this year. Outside of one dud performance, he's been great. So he's at the top of tier 2, but I felt more comfortable down here in tier 2 than I did in tier 1. James Cook at 4 at the Miami Dolphins. So first of all, this is our first injury guy. As of the time of this filming, James Cook missed practice today with a foot and ankle injury. I'm assuming it's the same exact foot. But the bottom line is this. James Cook, if he plays in the matchup at Miami, this is a fantastic one. I mean, James Cook, in his best weeks, 30-plus points. In his worst weeks, been about 8 to 10 points. Still really good, and I can see them just using him a bunch if he ends up playing. I'll predict that he plays just for now, and he's at number 4. Rico Dowdle, let's see how much this stirs up some things, because I've got him over Jahmyr Gibbs at number 6. Rico Dowdle, here's my argument on this one. And I think it's pretty logic-based. Rico Dowdle has been fantastic. Like, if you look at the league leaders in rushing, he's at the top. Like, not at the top, obviously. In the top 5. And he's not been a starter for, like, more than 3 or 4 games. The guy's been dominant against any team. Doesn't matter if it was Green Bay game or any other game. Of course, this matchup versus New Orleans, I want in on it. Now, the problem is that he's dealing with an injury, but he dealt with this injury and came in and still dominated against the Packers. This is a machine right here. Rico Dowdle is finally being discussed as a legitimate top back in the league, and that's why I've got him at number 5 in fantasy, because if the guy plays, and I don't know if he will, but I'm going to project that he does since he played through it on last Sunday. I'll project that he plays, and he's my number 5 running back. And the thing with Gibbs, when you look at Rico and Gibbs' floors, Rico's floor is, he doesn't even have a floor. Like, we don't even know what his floor actually is as a starter, because all he's given us is ceiling. 30-plus points, by the way. Gibbs, the problem with him, his ceiling games, like, obviously they're great. But the problem is that his floor games have been actually pretty low this year. And he's done it several times. So against Washington, I love the matchup. I'm all in on Gibbs this week, but I'm not as in on him as I am with Rico. And what a world this is, right? What a world it is for me to rank Rico Dowdle over Jahmyr Gibbs. But that's how fantasy goes, man. And right now, I view Rico as a better fantasy back for this week in particular. But I want to take it to the polls at fsroundup.com, our site. I'm going to go ahead and look up Rico Dowdle. I'm going to go to chat, then go to start a poll for week 10. And I'm going to add Jahmyr Gibbs. I want your vote on this one. Give me your vote on who you really would choose in fantasy football for week 10. I'm going to go Dowdle. You go vote on this one. It's completely free to vote, completely free to start your own poll. But if you want access to my weekly top 260 rankings on a weekly basis, go ahead and get the premium subscription, which is at $6 a month right now. And honestly, that might go up soon. You need to jump on the price now because it's not just the rankings. And that's part of the reason we're considering raising it back up, is because it's the rankings, the automatic waiver tool, which is key at this point in time. It's also the comparison feature, the league sync up feature, league winning tools for $6 a month is what you're getting. You need to jump on the price right now before it changes. And the reason we dropped it is because we wanted it as affordable as possible. League winning tools for regardless if you play basketball, fantasy hockey, any of the sports at an affordable price anywhere you lived. But you need to hop on the price today. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Josh Jacobs at 7 and Saquon at 8. They're taking on each other on Monday night in Green Bay. So obviously the injury report on this one is not out because those injury reports for Monday night games, they come out on Thursdays. So we don't know the real status of particularly Saquon. But let me get into Jacobs first because obviously Jacobs is still dealing with his own injuries as well, but he's been playing through it and he's still a dominant fantasy back because the reason is he's always getting used at the red zone. He's a touchdown lock, basically. One of the true touchdown locks this year is Josh Jacobs, and against Philly, it doesn't really worry me. The only thing that bothers me with Jacobs, really, is the lack of efficiency that he's seen. But with Saquon Barkley, honestly, I'm torn on this one. So I've seen a lot of reports that suggest he's going to play, so that's why he's ranked in the first place. But number two is that Saquon Barkley, in theory, if they use him like they did finally when their offense clicked last time they played against the Giants before the bye week, he should be a dominant fantasy back moving forward. But this Philly offense has been so weird, and that's why I don't know what to do with Saquon Barkley and the rest of the Giants' options, frankly. So I do have a little concern. That's why he's down here in tier 3. Derrick Henry's at 9, and Quinshon Judkins is at number 10. So Derrick Henry at Minnesota this week feels like a solid matchup just because of the fact that I think Baltimore is going to start rattling off wins. And we saw it the last 2 weeks. In positive game scripts, Derrick Henry's value in fantasy, look at that go. I mean, it's already back. I mean, they're in positive game scripts, which I have always said is key to his success in fantasy football. If they're down, he's not a pass catcher, so he will be taken off the field a lot of the time. But if they're up and they're leading and they need to bleed the clock, nobody does it better than Derrick Henry. That's why it's key. But the only problem with this matchup is it is against Minnesota's defense, which maybe keeps him in the game for a little longer. But I think by the end of this game, in the fourth quarter, midway through it, I think Baltimore will be winning, and that's where we see Derrick Henry's value come through for fantasy. Quinshon Judkins. You know, it's funny because I said it a couple weeks ago. I would be trying to move off of Quinshon Judkins, but if you look at the guy's schedule, I actually like it. And the reason I said to move off of him in the first place was because any smart defense that has any talent and any brains behind the operation is going to recognize all we got to do is shut down Judkins and they can't move the ball. So every team would stack the box in theory against the Browns. Well, the Jets obviously are not a well-run operation, number one. And then they just gave up 2 important pieces to their defense. The most important piece being Quinnen Williams, who is in the middle of that defensive line. So that opens up a gaping hole in that defense for Quinshon to run through. So assuming he plays, and I, again, have seen a lot of reports indicating he will, I love Judkins this week a lot, actually. And that's why I've got him ranked over Devon Achane at number 11 and Kyron Williams to round it out at 12. So the reason I love Achane, I do love the guy. But the reason I love Judkins over Achane this week is because I think Judkins' matchup is fantastic and there's no way they stop him. Achane, there is a way that you can put a cap on him and minimize his impact, And the Buffalo Bills know how to do that best. I mean, Buffalo has done very well against Miami over the years. They just know how to play these guys. But obviously, the one thing that I keep coming back to, and the reason I love Achane for fantasy, is because even when his team is bad, he's never bad for fantasy because he's so involved as a pass catcher. So if you put a cap on Achane, that means like 14 to 13 points. But that floor is so safe in a PPR format, particularly where sometimes he gets you 16 points in capped weeks. Achane's floor is too high to put much lower than this, but I do think probably more of a floor game. And then Kyren Williams at 12 to round out the tier at San Francisco. Last time he played them earlier in the year, it was his best game. He was absolutely electric in that game. And I don't put it past him to happen again. The only problem I've got with Kyren is this is a legitimate discussion. Like Blake Corum, it's not a split backfield by any stretch of the imagination, but Blake Corum is plenty involved. And it actually is getting worse for Kyren Williams. So Kyren, it completely depends on his efficiency at the goal line and his involvement as a pass catcher. Now, if we see the same type of game script we saw the first time, it should work out good, which is why I've got him at 12, because I think San Francisco's defense is even more beatable now than they were back then. Dropping down to our next tier, Ashton Genty's at 13 and J.K. Dobbins is at 14. So they're taking on each other tomorrow night in Denver, and obviously this matchup couldn't be much worse for someone like Ashton Genty. I mean, he's obviously already on a bad offense. The offense is just terrible. But, the good thing is last week, it really shows through that he's kind of got a pretty good floor as well because he gets so much work. I mean, this is a 20-plus opportunity guarantee every type of weak player. I mean, that's what Genty is, but the matchup is so bad that I don't think he's going to get in the end zone. And if he does, that's what's going to hold his fantasy value together. But because of the fact that he gets so many opportunities, I've still got him in this range because there's just a lot of injuries and bye weeks to keep him up this week where I would have preferred to have him ranked outside the top 15. J.K. Dobbins at 14, I think the matchup is fantastic. And I will say this, RJ Harvey is up in my rankings this week. You guys will see that. But J.K. Dobbins, I still look at as the clear-cut RB1. Like, J.K. Dobbins, from a carry perspective, is still dominating. And he's been very efficient. They have no reason to give him less work. Like, RJ Harvey has been good in his role. But as far as the role of a RB1 carry-wise goes, that's still J.K. Dobbins. And the matchup this week is fantastic. So I think Dobbins could have a really good day. Kyle Monangai is at 15. Yeah, you heard that right. I mean, this is with DeAndre Swift in the rankings this week. It's funny because I came into the week assuming that I would rank Swift over Monangai if he was coming back. There's revelations that happen, and we just had one today. Ben Johnson was asked about the running back situation, and he basically put Swift on notice. Said, yeah, I think, he did really well on his work, and I've got a lot of confidence in him moving forward. It was kind of a Rico Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard response. And Swift hasn't been bad, but Monangai, for that team, he's always favored Monangai as a Montgomery type. Maybe he starts to get more work. And against the Giants this week, I want the matchup. Dropping down to our next tier, Kamani Vidal is at 16. He's sticking around, and Travion Henderson moves up to 17. So with Vidal, there's a couple things that we needed to discuss here just to get out, everything out in the open. He obviously was bad last week. And if you actually look at FSRoundup.com, he was outproduced by both of the backup running backs who played. But if you also look deep enough on FSRoundup.com, he was in there the majority of the amount of time. Vidal is still the running back one. It just so happened last week was a weird game versus Tennessee. I've said it multiple times this week, though, and I'll say it again. I think that the Chargers are going to pretty handily beat the Steelers in this game. Steelers going to West Coast, never a good recipe for success for them. And I do think Vidal probably has a good day against the Steelers' ground attack. And I know that sounds counteractive because of the fact that they just lost Joe Alt for the season. I still think that Kamani Vidal is a really solid play this week. Travion Henderson may feel weird because last week was the week that they gave him the opportunities and he still didn't produce a great fantasy day. But if you looked at him on the work that he did, he looked good. He was efficient on the ground and in the air. And it doesn't look like Ramondre is coming back this week. So Ramondre is not in the rankings because I don't think he's going to play. But Travion Henderson at Tampa, I do think they'll be in a negative game script to where they have to throw the ball more. And Travion was that guy for them last week. So I do think that continues to be the case in week 10 versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Rachaad White is at 18 and DeAndre Swift is at 19 to round out the tier. So Rachaad White, it's bad news, man. I mean, even after the bye week, Bucky Irving's still not practicing. I said this to people who were asking me if Bucky was a good trade target. I think he's a fine one, but you've got to factor in that we have no idea, still to this day, I mean, what is it, almost 2 months later, when he's going to return. Rachaad White should not be on the waiver wire. He's going to start this week versus New England, and this offense after the bye week, I would imagine they'll come out a lot more rested and just a lot more explosive than they looked leading into the bye week, the past 2 weeks in particular. So Rachaad White against New England's defense, I actually think it's an okay matchup for him to play and actually be a potential ceiling type of play. DeAndre Swift, you know, like I said, I really do think that there's a lot of credence to this statement that Ben Johnson made, basically saying, like, he's on notice here, and he's still injured too. He returned to a limited practice. That's why he's in the rankings, trending in the right direction. I do still think that the matchup is great, and that's why I can't put Swift much lower than this, because if he plays, I'm sure he'll be involved, and I love the matchup. But I really do prefer Monungai right now in fantasy over Swift based off Ben Johnson's comments alone. Dropping down to our next tier, I've got Jaylen Warren at 20, and Travis Etienne is at 21. Now, Jaylen Warren at that Los Angeles Chargers matchup, you know, I wanted to put him lower, but I really don't like this tier a whole lot because I think there's a lot of bad matchups and bad offensive lines running behind them. I do think that Jaylen Warren is kind of in a unique position to where if you look at his floor this year, it's actually been remarkably steady. Like, he's actually had a really steady floor, and even if he doesn't be, you know, last week wasn't an efficient game, but he got in the end zone twice. I don't think that's going to happen again. I think it's going to be a negative game script, but that's when he's involved as a pass catcher. So I think Warren is kind of bust-proof in some ways, and I don't think it's going to be his best matchup, but he sticks at 20 because he's kind of got a bust-proof quality to him right now. Travis Etienne, Woody Marks is at 22. They're taking on each other in Houston this week. I hate the matchup for Etienne. And last week should have been a week where, in theory, he could have done well. And I think he could have if he got in the end zone because he definitely handled the majority of the work. But this week, man, I would not be surprised if they start to get Bashul Tootin more involved again and LaQuint Allen involved again because this is going to be a bad game for Etienne. Against Houston's defense, that's brutal in Houston. I really don't like the matchup, but I'll keep him at 21 just because he's their starter right now. But Woody Marks, man, he's right behind him because I like the matchup for Woody Marks. Last week I didn't like it. Woody Marks was not well ranked for me, but I do think if still in that split, if it's a true 50-50, and it is, and by the way, Nick Chubb also hurt right now as well, I think Woody Marks could be a good ceiling play this week. David Montgomery's at 23, and Breece Hall is at 24 to round out the tier. Man, that's so sad. I don't want to discuss that one. So we'll start with Montgomery, which is, I think I would rather take his upside in the matchup versus Washington, which is fantastic, over the upside that Breece Hall is stripped and deprived of. I mean, David Montgomery, at the very least, I think he could get like 10 carries and 80 yards and maybe a touchdown run. But there's no question, like, his role on a weekly basis is not like it was last year, and his ceiling is not as high as it was last year. Neither is his floor. So I do continue to rank him in this like 20 to 25 range only because of that. But I do like the matchup this week. And Breece Hall, it's just a sad story, man. I mean, I think I saw him tweet basically saying, like, I'm happy for all those guys who got to leave. Like, he wanted out so bad. And they don't like him either, but they still wanted a third-round pick for him when someone was offering him a fourth and a sixth. So bizarre. And I wish Breece Hall got traded because, honestly, guys, there's two ways to look at his fantasy value moving forward. Number one is he's on a contract year, so he could fight very hard for it. And I can see that. But number two is if I'm Breece Hall and I'm like, I have value across the league, it's clear, then I don't want to get injured, and I'm not going to sell out my body a lot. So there's two ways I actually can see being the case, but either way this week versus the Cleveland Browns, just not a good matchup for him. Very sad, Breece Hall. I feel for you, man. I really like you as a player, and I've always loved you as a running back, so just get through it. Dropping down to our next tier, RJ Harvey's at 25, and Terrell Jennings is at 26. So with RJ Harvey, like I said, with J.K. Dobbins, he was going to move up the rankings because his efficiency in this offense has been out of this world the past several weeks. Like, this is a real piece to their weekly game plan at this point. That's why I feel comfortable relatively having him inside the top 30, for the remainder of the season. But I will say, he's not even close to J.K. Dobbins on the carry perspective. This is a pass-catching back with serious weekly involvement, but I do think that J.K. Dobbins, this could be his day because it's going against the Raiders, where I don't think it's probably that competitive for very long. Terrell Jennings at Tampa Bay. I was just singing Trayvion's praises for the first time in a long time, I feel like, but Terrell Jennings was involved. And the weird part about this, and the reason I ultimately ranked Trayvion several tiers above Terrell Jennings is because of the fact that Terrell Jennings was not in on nearly the amount of snaps that Trayvion was. And if the game script goes how I think it could go, which is that they lose this game and they'll be trailing Tampa, I do think that puts them in a position to where they're probably more inclined to play Trayvion with his pass-catching upside. So I do see a rough path for Terrell Jennings, but I still think he's worthy inside the top 30 as a play this week. Aaron Jones is at 27 to round out this tier versus the Baltimore Ravens. The matchup, honestly, I could see a world where this one works because the Ravens I still have my questions on. But Aaron Jones is injured again. I will say this, it looks like he's probably going to play. So assuming he plays, I think Aaron Jones actually has a decent amount of upside. I really do, because I think that they'll be able to hang for maybe like a half or so, and then they'll probably need to throw a lot of passes, and that's where Aaron Jones gets the dump-offs. So it's another straight week where I prefer Aaron Jones over Jordan Mason simply because of game script. Dropping down to our next tier, our last tier, Kenneth Walker is at 28, and Nick Chubb is at 29. So with Kenneth Walker, he's taking on the Cardinals, and I continue to say this, nothing really changes here. He's in a committee, but he's the favorite of mine in the committee because of the explosive upside. Now, the problem is we haven't seen him break off a touchdown run yet, and that's really what he needs to salvage any sort of upside. But he's very close. Like, he's done it several times this year. He's gotten caught from behind just on a leg swipe or something like that. He can break off the big run. I still believe in it. And against Cardinals this week, I think it could happen. So I'm going to continue to rank him over Charbonnet. But Nick Chubb, I just went through. He's got an injury that he's dealing with, but I like the matchup. And that's the reason that he's still inside the top 30 with all the bye weeks and injuries we've got. I prefer him over guys like Devin Singletary, Tyrone Tracy, Alvin Kamara, Bam Knight, because I like the matchup a lot this week. And then Zach Charbonnet to round out the top 30. Again, committee backfield, and the difference between him and Kenneth is Charbonnet gets the red zone opportunities. I do think they will continue to be the trend because it's working for them. But the bottom line is if Charbonnet doesn't get in the end zone, you're really unhappy with playing him. That's why I'm going to continue to rate Kenneth over Charbonnet, because on a week-to-week basis, Kenneth Walker's the better player and just gets more opportunities in open field. Think of the rankings in the comments below, and if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings for this week, click on this video right here.